All here this afternoon. Nice to see a well-packed out meeting, and as I've mentioned before, well, people know when there's quality on offer, which there certainly is today. We've got Harpal and Keith talking about the situation in the Middle East, in particular Libya and Syria. It's in the form of a sort of panel discussion, so you will also have plenty of opportunity to put your points and your questions. So I think without further ado, I will ask Harpal to kick off.
Thank you, Comrade Chairman, comrades and friends. I'd like to make just a few very brief points about the situation in Libya. I won't explain it in detail because I think that should come in view of the nature of this meeting. It's supposed to be a panel and a discussion, so you have a chance to speak, comment and ask questions if that is your desire. I'd just like to make the following few points. The first point I'd like to make is that there is nothing sudden about the war in Libya. Libyan war has been in preparation for literally a very long time. Imperialism was simply waiting for an opportunity that would give it the chance to interfere much more directly into Libyan affairs than it has been doing for a very long time. The hostility to Libya is not new. The hostility to Libya is as old as the overthrow of King Idris in September 1969. He was a British puppet. American bases were there, British bases were there. And when Colonel Gadaffi's regime came to power, and they not only threw the king out, with it went the bases, they were expelled. And subsequently, the Libyan regime went on to nationalize its mineral resources, which principally at the time was oil, now it's gas as well, and used the wealth of Libya principally for the purpose of bringing in modern life to Libya. Libya was the most tribal society in Africa. It was a very, very backward country. It was a benighted place. In 1951-52, it had the lowest standard of living, with something like $50 a year per capita income. It literally was antediluvian place, and it has been changed beyond recognition since Gadaffi's regime came to power. So imperialism has hostility towards all those regimes whose basic crime is to feed their people, to house their people, to educate their people, etc. I mean, you can take other examples, and a lot of people don't like Colonel Gadaffi. That doesn't really matter whether you like him or not. The basic thing is you have to look at the country and see what has been done in that case. Now, you would have thought that Fidel Castro was a charming man, but he is the butt of American venom. You know, he's portrayed as a horrible dictator. For what reason? Because Cuba is the only country in the New World which really feeds its people. Although it's a very poor country, it's a small country with a small economy, it educates its people, it eradicates disease there, and what's more, is able to render fraternal assistance to other people in matters of education, health, and sometimes even with armed forces to help liberation struggles, as Cuba did in the case of Africa. So the war against Libya has been preparation. So when certain people in the movement say, oh, things have changed since imperialism invaded Libya. No, they haven't changed. All that has changed is imperialism has got much more involved with its armed forces. So the armed forces of imperialism are very much on the side of reactionaries in Libya, and they are bombing, and they're acting as the air force of a basically extremely weak opposition to the Libyan regime. That opposition, which is involved in a civil war against the Libyan regime, wouldn't last more than 3-4 weeks if it was left to the Libyan people to sort out their affairs. This war is being prolonged because imperialism is siding with a weak side, a reactionary side. The other thing that I want to mention here at this moment is that notwithstanding the 60 days of bombing of Libya, during which time its infrastructure has been destroyed, everything has been done to damage its people. Although this no-fly zone was introduced, in inverted commas, to protect civilian lives. A lot of civilians are being killed by NATO's bombing. And Colonel Gaddafi's own son, one of his sons, and 3 of his grandchildren have literally been assassinated by NATO's bombers. NATO may decry terrorism here, terrorism there, terrorism all over the world, but the fact of the matter is NATO is the most sophisticated assassination machine in the world. They are not the armed forces of countries to defend those countries. These are forces which are actually there to assassinate people and to assassinate the leadership of the people, the leadership that they don't like. But notwithstanding the fact this bombing has been going on, there is this stalemate. Imperialism is not at the moment anyway winning. They had hoped that week to week's bombing would just enable the ragtag of Libyan opposition to march on Tripoli, and hey presto, we would have declared victory for democracy. We'd be away while our puppets work from Tripoli and Benghazi, etc. That's not happening, and that's actually presenting imperialism with a very difficult choice. I know which choice they will make, but it's difficult all the same. They'll have to introduce ground forces. Some of their ground forces are already there, but not in the numbers that are needed in order to be able to overwhelm the Libyan regime. The other point to make is that no-fly zone, apparently introduced with the sanction of the United Nations Resolution 1973, was a no-fly zone. What is a no-fly zone? It literally, its meaning is that Libyan Air Force cannot fly over Libyan skies. It's an infringement of Libyan sovereignty, but all the same, the no-fly zone means just that. It simply would have meant, and as was understood by everyone, including the Financial Times, that no-fly zone will not do the job for them because the Libyan tanks and Libyan artillery could still travel on the ground. But in fact, no-fly zone has been turned into an all-out attack on the Libyan armed forces. The Libyan tanks, the Libyan artillery cannot move from one place to another without being bombed by the NATO forces. Because the purpose of this no-fly zone is not to protect civilians. Civilians are being killed. Even civilians belonging to the opposition are every now and then bombed in what has sickeningly come to be called friendly fire. So quite a few people who are on their side have been killed by this bombing as well. But the real purpose of this no-fly zone is regime change. It always was, but it's become explicit. The very people who used to say, it's not the purpose of this action to regime change, we are simply trying to give help to the Libyan civilians who are endangered by the dictatorial regime of Colonel Gaddafi. That was the story. And then 10 days ago or so, David Cameron, Sarkozy of France, and Obama, who won the Peace Prize, by the way, not so long ago. He's a Nobel laureate for peace. They wrote an article in the Financial Times that there can be no solution to the Libyan problem unless Colonel Gaddafi leaves the country and leaves power. You know, the arrogance of it. I mean, even the East India Company would have been slightly envious of what these people are doing. They're saying, Colonel Gaddafi must leave power and must leave Libya. Can you imagine the attitude of the British people would be? No matter how much horrible you think David Cameron is, some foreign country comes and says, Mr. Cameron must leave office and must leave the country. Now, that is the extent of it, and how would it impress you to say...
I'd agree.
No, I might be inclined to say, no, you don't tell him, we'll tell him to leave, we'll make him leave. But it's not the business of foreign countries to come and tell which government you will have. So the purpose of it is always regime change. This war is not a war for democracy. Anybody who knows anything about Marxist-Leninist theory, anybody who knows anything about the practice of imperialism would know that imperialism strives for domination, not for democracy. Neither in its home policy nor in its external policy does it stand for democracy. It stands for domination. Monopolies in the sphere of economics and monopolization in the sphere of power. And that is what precisely imperialism stands for. Democracy means absolutely nothing. The very people, Obama busts his blood vessels saying Colonel Gaddafi is harming civilians. Other countries might overlook the harm to civilians. America is a different kind of country. Yes, it is a very different kind of country. America does not even consider killing unless it's in millions. 4 million Koreans there, 3 million Indochinese there, 2 million Iraqis there, 1.5 million Indonesians, and so the roll carries on. These are the people who are talking about human rights. Very next door, they have no problem sanctioning the repression of people in Bahrain, because Bahrain, this all corporation with a flag, actually is host to the 5th American Fleet. They have no problem sanctioning the daily murders committed by Zionists of the Palestinian people. Only 2 years ago in Gaza, the Zionists killed 1,400 people. There was Nakba protest across the border from Lebanon and from Syria and within the Palestinian territories within Israel, and they killed 16 people. Well, you didn't... Unarmed people protesting against that. And there is no condemnation. Little tut, Financial Times saying, yes, we know Hamas is brutal. That's the ritual thing. But Israel should behave differently because Israel is a democracy. Yes, it's a democracy whose leaders do not have breakfast unless they've killed a few Palestinians. They don't go for lunch unless they killed a few Palestinians. And they certainly don't have dinner and their drinks unless they've killed a few Palestinians. And this relentlessly goes on, and Israel is still a democracy. Now, there are people who send me articles written on the net where actually they try and say Israel controls America, America does not control Israel. Now, that is foolish thing to assert. Fact of the matter is, Israel is a little monkey. American imperialism is the organ grinder. Nothing happens unless American imperialism sanctions. They're also able to give a long list of Jews who are in the American administration and the American security agencies and the American diplomatic service and so on, so say the Jews control the world. To the extent that the Jews are prominent in America, they're part of the American ruling imperialist class. They don't control as Jews. They control as being part of the American imperialist ruling class. And we've got to get it right. So instead of blaming Jews, we should blame Zionism and its chief protector, U.S. imperialism, and that's where things stand. If there is a hypocrisy, if imperialism behaves differently in the case of Israel and Bahrain and Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and it did so in the case of Tunisia and Egypt not so long ago, from the way it behaves towards Syria and Libya. I mustn't talk about Syria because there will be a demarcation dispute otherwise. The way they behave differently, it's only an apparent contradiction. It's not a real contradiction, because imperialism is defending its class interests, and its class interests are served by condoning repression in one case and by opposing repression in another case, or even apparent repression in another case. There is a lesson that the left wing in this country and in most of the imperialist countries could take from imperialism. Unfortunately, most of the left in imperialist countries is an imperialist left. It takes its cue from imperialism and then formulates its policy and goes along with it. It literally rolls over like a little puppy when it sees its master, rolls over and expects to be kicked, loved, whatever you do to puppies. I'm not in the business of it. But that's what they do. We should not behave. Our attitude should not be the same towards Syria and Libya as was our attitude towards Tunisia and Egypt, or as is our attitude towards Israel, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, etc. Because we too must serve our class interests. We must see which of these regimes oppose imperialism and stand in the way of imperialism carrying out its plans for domination, and which regimes go along with it. And that is what determines our attitude. So if people say there is a contradiction, just because my neighbor is painting his house, maybe it needs his painting the house. I don't have to start painting my house just whether it needs it or not. Libyan people do not need to change their regime just because the Egyptians next door are changing or the Tunisians next door are changing. The question is, what exactly are you changing and in favor of what? But even if the Libyan people want to do it, let the Libyan people sort out. When the English people had their civil war, unfortunately they don't have often enough, but it was in the 17th century. It was sorted out by the English. The royalists got the worst of it. Many of them lost their heads. And I was just about to say, and it taught them a lesson. Well, those who were done to death were not there to learn the lesson, but their followers did learn a lesson, that that's not the way you behave. Certainly Charles II had learned his lesson. If he didn't want to go back on his journeys to the continent of Europe as a non-entity living in refuge, he had to behave, and behave in the way that the coming ruling class, the bourgeoisie, wanted him to behave. And so we sorted out our own affairs. We have no right to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries. I'm a strong supporter, and I think my party is a strong supporter, of the system that was established after the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. Namely, there is the sovereignty of states, and let the states sort out their own affairs. And I think if the Libyan and Syrian people were allowed to sort out their own affairs, they would definitely not be overthrowing Gadaffi, and they would definitely not be overthrowing Assad. But if they were allowed to settle their own affairs, these little sultans and kings and sheikhs would not actually be sleeping secure in their beds. And that's why there is this unholy alliance. Lenin made this point over 100 years ago. Nothing could show the decrepitude and of the modern day European bourgeoisie, he said, and we might add Americans and Japanese as well, right? Than the alliance that they make with the most reactionary feudal elements all over the world for the sake of the capitalist swindlers and manipulators on the stock market in their own countries. So there is this alliance. If countries in the Middle East live in medieval conditions, this is because imperialism, the most advanced form of capitalism, actually does to support those regimes. Libya is targeted because Libya, ever since the Libyan regime came to power, it has stood in the way of imperialist domination of not only Libya but many other places. Colonel Gaddafi's regime has given generous support to the national liberation movements in Africa, in the Middle East, and even far beyond. Even in this sceptered island, some people have received some help from the Libyan regime. And of course the British government has a very long memory. It does not forget. And they have always wanted to overthrow the Gaddafi regime. Secondly, Libyans use the oil wealth. By and large, I'm not saying every bit of it is used for the benefit of the people. By and large, they use their oil wealth to actually help their people. It's a country of only 6 million people. It has got huge oil wealth. It gets something like $46 billion every year from the sale of oil. It's modernizing its country. There's infrastructure before it was destroyed in the last 2 months. They have got education. Hardly anybody is illiterate in Libya. At the time of Colonel Gaddafi coming to power, most of the population was illiterate. Now maybe 5 or 6 or 7% are illiterate. These are people probably who can never be persuaded to go to school, because Libya still continues to be a very tribal society. And it's got a health system which is the envy of the whole of Africa. It's got a standard of living which is the highest in Africa. Now, variously, the per capita income of modern-day Libyans is put anywhere between $12,000 to $16,000. Now, that's a very, very high income for what is, after all, a third world country. So Libya really does not score very well. There are people who don't like Gaddafi because he wants Africa to be united. He wants Africans to take charge of their own affairs. He wants Africans to hold their head high rather than be treated as slaves. So there are even Arab supremacists who do not like Gaddafi because he puts a lot of premium on being an African. So one way or the other, Libya does not score very high. And although in the last 10 years, under pressure from imperialism, and in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and in the aftermath of the invasion of Iraq, Libya has made certain undoubtedly serious concessions to imperialism. But even then, Libya has not become the kind of steward that imperialism likes to have in these countries. So that after Libya was kind of reintegrated into the international community, these are not my words, but words you hear all over the place. Even then, when oil contracts were being given to people, imperialism did not get the kind of oil agreements that they're used to. Namely, they're used to looting in the fashion of the East India Company. They're not used to doing trade. Trade is hard work, man. You've got to be able to pick people's pockets. You've got to be able to put your hand in other people's treasuries and bring and say, you won't need it, we need it more than you do. That's really. They like the kind of partnership that exists between a robber and the person who is robbed. You hand over the wallet and we take it. There is a perfect cooperation between us. There is not. If you resist, of course, you're being disagreeable, and that's the basic position they have towards that. Of course, there is another point. In the last few years, China has become the most important trading partner of Africa. China is investing a lot of money in on the African continent, especially in energy resources, as indeed in Latin America, as indeed Central Asia. So American imperialism does not think only of today. Only working people think of today, like us, right? Where is the next meal coming from? It's thinking of what happens in 10 years' time, what happens in 15 years. It basically wants to deny China any access to the mineral resources, especially oil and gas. Oil, even now, continues to be the staple diet of the imperialist industry and of its war machines. So they want to deny China. It's a very provocative, very hostile act, comparable to what the Roosevelt administration did with Japan. Japan and Britain cut off oil supplies to Japan, thus making sure that Japan had no choice but to attack America or Britain, and that's what Japan went on to do. Now, sometimes the Chinese comrades say they don't agree with the idea that class struggle is the motive force of history. Well, whether it is or it isn't, the American imperialists are actually teaching a lesson to the Chinese in class struggle. That's what they're involved in. Everywhere, the idea is to actually make life difficult for the Chinese. This is the idea of Afghanistan as well. Not only to corner the routes for pipes, not only to corner minerals, but also come next door to China from every direction. That's why they try and cause troubles in Xinjiang, in Tibet, and everywhere. So, also, they might all look brothers. Like as Karl Marx said, capitalists are of course united as a class against the working class. But on the floor of the stock exchange, it's a fight among brothers. You know, no capitalist wants to take a loss. No capitalist is so enamored of his class brothers as to say, it's all right, I'll take the loss, you make the money today. Nobody does that. So while there is a war going on by imperialism against the Libyan people, the different imperialist powers are maneuvering, of course, to make the most of it and secure their own position. France is fighting for its own interest, Britain is fighting for its own interest, and of course America is fighting for its own interest. The next point that I'd like to make is the attitude of Stop the War coalition. When the trouble started, the latest trouble started in Libya, and they started in the middle of February, to be precise, on the 16th of February. Stop the War suddenly got an idea, brilliant idea, to fight against imperialism and to make the position of the anti-war movement very clear on imperialism. They held a demonstration. And guess against whom they held a demonstration? Against the Libyans. They held a demonstration against the Libyans because Colonel Gadaffi was a dictator who was suppressing his own people. Well, we pointed out this was wrong, and this was siding with imperialism. Within a month, the United Nations Security Council passed Resolution 1973, 17th of March. And 2 days later, the bombing started in earnest. Now, these bombings don't start from a little dinghy. A whole armada of fighter planes, aircraft carriers, frigates, destroyers, and various other kinds of armaments have been assembled well in advance for this war. And as soon as the green light was there from the Security Council, they started bombing. The Stop the War then says, don't bomb Libya. They want the Gadaffi regime to be overthrown. But you know that the internal opposition cannot overthrow it. So you might as well say we'd like NATO to bomb the Gadaffi regime out of power. But of course, a lot of people are frightened of that logical conclusion that follows from their own position. They wouldn't do that. They then went on, and what was their new line? We're against the bombing, because bombing would entrench Gadaffi in his position as the leader of the Libyan government. Because he would be able to portray himself as a nationalist defending himself against NATO's bombing. And therefore, the best thing would be for NATO not to bomb and let the people in Libya overthrow Gadaffi. That's the absurdity to which they were reduced. So they're not against imperialist intervention. They're only against intervention just in case it should help by ending up entrenching Gaddafi's position in Libya. So that's the position of these anti-war warriors. This is the position that they adopt. And they adopt that position basically because they take their line from the imperialist Labour Party. Whatever the Labour Party does is right. There's not a crime that the Labour Party can commit which will make these people break their even organizational, let alone ideological link with social democracy, with the Labour Party. So that's what is happening. And comrades, we in the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, of which I am a member, has taken the lead in exposing them. And we invite you, we ask you, we request you, we beg you to give us the fullest possible support in exposing these charlatans for the flunkies of imperialism that they are. When it comes to Libyan opposition, the Libyan opposition is made up of a lot of people. It's made up of ex-royalists, people who've never reconciled to the Gaddafi regime because they are followers of King Idris. It's made up of feudalists who want to live in the 17th century, who do not like even such minor things as equality of women. I mean, real equality of women cannot be achieved except under socialism, because to achieve equality, you must provide them with the same social facilities, that will free them from the laundry, the kitchen, and the housework, and the rearing of children all on their own. These have to be made into social facilities. But all the same, in Libya, there is a certain level of equality of women. Libyan women can actually join the armed forces. There's nobody who discriminates against Libyan women because they are women. And there are a lot of people who don't like the fact that women are equal. There are people who don't like the fact that Gaddafi has invited a lot of Africans to come to Libya. I mean, Libya has a population of 6 million. And at least 1 million are expatriates from all over the world, from Africa to India to Middle East. They go there because there are work opportunities, and also because Africans are able to work there at better wages and with far less discrimination than they face in their own countries. Then, of course, there are fundamentalists of the Al-Qaeda type who want to establish an Islamic caliphate. Imperialism is supposed to be fighting against terrorism. It's waged a war on terror. But in Libya, they are in bed with the people they're supposed to be fighting against. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group is one such creature which was produced, which was formed of the Libyans who fought as Mujahideen in Afghanistan against the Soviet forces at that time. And at the end of the war, they all transferred themselves into Libya, and they have been fighting against the Gaddafi regime. They have risen up in revolt more than once. They've been crushed. They've tried to assassinate Colonel Gaddafi. They haven't been successful. And then there is the National Salvation Front of Libya, which is the creation of the CIA. So everything that actually, this witch's brew is composed of reactionaries, feudalists, straightforward mercenaries and paid agents of imperialism, ex-royalists, and people who basically want to live in the Arabian Peninsula of the 6th or the 7th century. This is what these people are. If they were to come to power, they will, yes, not be in power, they'll be in government, and their chief function would be to enrich themselves, to degrade the life and living conditions of the Libyan people, and hand over the lion's share of Libya's wealth to imperialism. That's what this fight is. So in conclusion, comrades, we have a duty. Whatever you think of the Libyan regime. Whatever your personal views of what democracy is, because all of us have our King Charles's head. You know, we have our favorite things that we like and which we don't like. We have a duty in the interest of the fight against imperialism to support the resistance offered against imperialist onslaught by the Gadaffi regime. And in that instance, in that case, you have to say death to imperialism and victory to the Gadaffi regime. Thank you for listening to me.